जय श्री श्री राधा गोपीनाथ जी की जय, जगन्नाथ बलदेव सुभद्राणी की जय, गौर प्रेमानंदे, हरि हरि बोल। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरये। नष्टप्रायेषु भद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवती उत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी। कृष्णाय वासुदेवाय देवकी नन्दनाय च नन्दगोपकुमाराय गोविन्दाय नमो नमः। So Hare Krishna, today we will be discussing from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 14, verses 43 and 44. Vinishchitvaevam rishayo vipannasya mahepate mamantururum tarasa tatrasit bahuko naraha. Vinishchitvaevam rishayo vipannasya mahepate mamantururum tarasa tatrasit bahuko naraha. Prabhuji's. Mataji's. Thank you. So we'll go through word to word. Vinishchitya, deciding. Evam, thus. Rishaya, the great sages. Vipannasya, dead. Mahipate, of the king. Mamantu, churned. Urum, the thighs. Tarasa, with specific power. Tatra, thereupon. Asit, was born. Bahuka, of the name Bahuka, dwarf. Nara, a person. Translation and purport by His Loving Divine Grace, Sri Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Ki Jai. Please hear. After making a decision, the saintly persons and sages churned the thighs of the dead body of King Vena with great force and according to a specific method. As a result of this churning, a dwarf-like person was born from the King Vena's body. Purport. That a person was born by the churning of the thighs of King Vena proves that the spirit soul is individual and separate from the body. The great sages and saintly persons could beget another person from the body of the dead King Vena, but it was not possible for them to bring King Vena back to life. King Vena was gone and certainly had taken another body. The saintly persons and sages were only concerned with the body of Vena because it was the result of the seminal succession in the family of Maharaj Dhruva. Consequently, the ingredients by which another body could be produced were there in the body of King Vena. By a certain process, when the thighs of the dead body were churned, another body came out. Although dead, the body of King Vena was preserved by drugs and by mantras chanted by King Vena's mother. In this way, the ingredients for the production of another body were there. When the body of the person named Bahuka came out of the dead body of King Vena, it was really not very astonishing. It was simply a question of knowing how to do it. From the semen of one body, another body is produced, and the life symptoms are visible due to the soul's taking shelter of this body. One should not think that it was impossible for another body to come out of the dead body of Maharaj Vena. This was performed by the skillful action of the sages. Verse 44, please hear. Kaka Krishna Tirashvango Rishvabahur Mahanu Rishvapanim Nasagro Raktakash Tamra Murdaja. This person born from King Vena's thighs was named Bahuka, and his complexion was as black as a crow's. All the limbs of his body were very short, his arms and legs were short, and his jaws were large, his nose was flat, his eyes were reddish, and his hair copper-colored. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapadakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sakrichatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sabadhutam Parijana Sahitam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakham Vitam Cha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namastute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priya Vancha Kalpatarobhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasati Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Bhuter Mahakriya Mahapuro Vibhu Nirmaya Shete Yadamosha Purusham Bhunte Gunan Shodha Shatmakan Solang Krisishtan Bhagavan Vachamsi Me Shri Krishna Sharanam Sharanagatam Katham Ritam Satatapibatam Bhakti Vedanta Markapantanam Sarvalok Rishi Deva Janna Prasannam. Okay, let's see. Hare Krishna. So welcome to today's Srimad Bhagavatam class. First of all, thank you for allowing me to take on this service, and I would like to seek blessings from Srila Prabhupada, my Shiksha, and my Diksha Gurus as well, so that I can please our beloved Lordships and Vaishnavas present. And also, I seek forgiveness if I do make any errors. Hare Krishna. So Srimad Bhagavatam, we know it gives examples to us from thousands of years ago, yet we still read them today, because Bhagavatam, it gives us the value and how to conduct life. So how should we read it? The third verse of Bhagavatam goes, Pibhata Bhagavatam Rasam Alayam Muhuraho rasika bhuvi bhavuka. So even the liberated souls, they relish this nectar by drinking it. And the saying goes that while it is wise to learn from our experiences, it is much more wise to learn from others' experiences, because we can see the actions that they took in certain situations and what the outcomes were. So in this current historical case that we have of Vena, we should actually be thankful to him. The question might come up, why? Just because he's a perfect example of what not to do within our life. And so we go to our first topic of the Brahmanas. So they represent the mouth of the Supreme Lord, the Kshatriyas the hands, the Vaishyas are the waist, and the Shudras are the thighs, or the legs. Brahmanas have certain roles within society. So Yajin, meaning that they worship the Supreme Lord, and they also perform yagyas. Patan, they themselves are very learned, so that they can preach to others. And Dana Pratika, they must give and also take back in charity. But sometimes it comes though that certain situations aren't right. That's when they can give advice to the society, or in this case the king. But if that advice is not followed, it's actually not on the Brahmanas if it is listened to or not. So after killing Vena, we see that the problem has arisen that there is no king. All these rogues and thieves are coming back from their hiding. And Vena, he wasn't married, so he didn't have any children to take on to the throne. So although these sages, they had the power to kill these thieves and rogues, they didn't want to overdo what is not their duty. They had already done enough. So it says that if a Kshatriya, he punishes miscreants, then his spiritual power increases. Whereas if a Brahmana, he kills miscreants, his spiritual power decreases. And we've heard in the previous lectures that if the Brahmanas ignore the sufferings of these people, their spiritual power also decreases. So seeing the downfall of the society, the Brahmanas, they were feeling very compassionate towards everyone there. And so they still endeavored to come up with a solution from their side. They were persistent with their goal of getting a good leader in the society. So they're taking the ownership onto them for bringing that good leader. They weren't just saying, let me focus on being a Brahmana, let me do my duty of performing yagyas and reading scriptures. So that's the mood of the Brahmanas. They are being compassionate. And Srila Prabhupada says that Brahmanas are actually like the think bank of the society. And so when Kali Yuga came, he destroyed the first layer, which was the Brahmanical aspect. And it said that if the Brahmanas fall down, then the other four Varnas and Ashramas also start falling down as well. So these sages, they're always in the mood of Loka Mangalam, for the welfare of people in the society. And we see that in the sages, from the sages of Naimisharanya. They saw that we, in the people of Kali Yuga, we're going to be very degraded. And they knew the medicine to help our sufferings was Harikatha, Harikirtan, and also Sadhu Sangha, Vaishnav Seva. Because this medicine that they were going to give to us, it would remove the root cause of our sufferings, tapatrayan unmulanam, out of it. And so Suta Goswami, hearing their questions, he said, and he was actually very impressed, and he said to them that your questions that you have asked is obviously for the benefit of society, and it has actually come out of your heart, like genuinely. You're not asking these questions to show your intelligence. And so while doing seva, we need to be very careful of the mood that we do our service in. We need to see if we're doing the service in order to impress someone, to show off our knowledge, or to attain a different position, or simply to serve our Guru, because we ourselves know our intentions. Krishna residing within us as Paramatma knows our intentions, our Guru also knows them. And so, now Brahmanas, they're churning the thighs of Vena, and they're actually wishing for the Supreme Lord to come and help them. But we know generally the Supreme Lord, he appears when we do yagyas, or obviously greater devotees, they're trying to invoke the Lord to come. And so that they weren't sure if the Lord was actually going to appear. And by process of churning the thighs of Vena, they were respecting the fact that he had come from a great lineage of Anga marriage and Dhruva marriage. So an example we can take is from Mahabharata. So at the end of Mahabharata, we know Krishna, he protected Parikshit Maharaj. And they said there's two reasons. First one, Krishna being Bhakta Vatsal, Uttara Devi, she was the devotee of Krishna, so he was protecting her womb. And the second reason is that he was preserving the lineage also of the Kurus, because they had great kings like Yudhishthir Maharaj and also technically Bhishma Dev. And so we hear about King Anga and the forefathers being Raj Rishis. So saintly kings who were devotees who didn't have any sins and they were powerful leaders. Anga Maharaj, he was the seventh king after Dhruva Maharaj. And so his father was Uttanpad, and then you go to Swayambhuva Manu and Brahmadev. So we see that there are not only Raj Rishis in their lineage, but also two Mahajanas, right? So from each and every Mahajana in the list, that they have their own history. And we can learn a lot from them, because it's not only by their speech, but by their actions is what we can take inspiration from. So they say that if we don't have enough knowledge, even if we try to follow the instructions of these Mahajanas, it will be easier to practice devotional service. Mahajano yena kata sapanta. So these sages, they wanted a spiritual leader who was good, obviously a good leader in society, who was going to be a spiritual leader, because the role of the king is to facilitate an environment where the four varnas and four ashramas could come together and go through towards the summum bonum, devotional service to the Supreme Lord. So when the sages actually have minor problems in life, they don't approach the Supreme Lord directly. They endeavor themselves first. When King Anga left, at that time they could have also approached the Lord to come and save them. But no, they themselves tried to endeavor first to come up with a solution, and now they've gone to seek help from the Lord. And now it's said that in this current phase, the sages were actually very lucky, because somehow by the arrangement of the Lord and also by Vena's mother, the body of King Vena was preserved. Otherwise, we know that in our Shastras we go through Antim Sanskar. So he would have been cremated. There wouldn't have been any body to churn the thighs off. And also, we know once the body dies, the blood, the muscles, the entire body itself starts to disintegrate. And so, in this way, the Brahmanas, they were trying to generate a living body out of the dead body. And as the first product came Bahuka. He was a dwarf, and because he came from the thighs of King Vena, he took care of the lower species, Nishadas. And he was actually considered the sum total of Vena's negative or sinful aspects, qualities. And the sages, seeing the negative attributes or not so sattvic looks of the king, they realized they still had obviously a little bit more to go to attain the success. And so we know the Supreme Lord, he gives mercy to those who sincerely endeavor, obviously with good intentions. And so we see that these sages had a full knowledge of what they were doing and the understanding required to do so, which for a mundane person or a scientist even, it would be hard for them to understand what they were doing and impossible to even replicate it. So in Bhagavatam and our Shastras, we have different examples of how various personalities have come into the world. First one being Vyasadeva. Parashar Muni, he merely only looked at Satyavati to conceive Vyasadeva. So he had the knowledge of how to produce children by mental conception. And in saying that, Brahmadev, he also, from his mind, came out the four Kumaras, Narada Muni, and also the Saptarishis. And Brahmaji himself came from the navel of Vishnu. Another example, or another thing is that these sages, they could give their power to other people. The example is of Kunti Maharani. She received her powers to beget the 6 sons from the demigods from the power of Durvasa Muni. And so these are the examples of how children could be produced without the normal means these days. And it shows how our human mentality of what reality is actually very tiny compared to the sciences of our Shastras. An example we can take is of the ultrasound machine. So it was created in late 1950s. For the reason, one of the reasons is to study the development of the fetus, the unborn child, within the womb of its mother. But we know our Shastras, even Bhagavatam, written 5,000 plus years ago, had talked about the development of the child within the womb. But Bhagavatam does not only stop there, like physically, it doesn't stop there about talking about the development physically. It talks about the living entity's experience within the womb. We hear the pain of the child within the womb because he's surrounded by blood, he's surrounded by urine and stool. In those types of environments, worms grow. And these worms, they're constantly biting the tender skin of that child. And he experiences agony, especially. He experiences so much agony that it says that sometimes he even becomes unconscious. And so the child, we know he stays in a very cramped stage. And so he starts praying to the Lord. He understands his relationship with the Lord at that time. And he says, please get me out of this confinement. But at the time of birth, he's praying to the Lord. Actually, he's being repentant. He's saying that I don't want to get out, because when I get out, I will be stuck. I will be captured by Maya and stuck in the miseries. So modern science is nothing compared to the science described within the Shastras. And going back to the verse, the churning of the thighs is actually compared to that of the Samudra Manthan. So when the demigods and demons, they were churning the milk ocean, first came out the poison, second the ratanas, and then came out the amrit. So what we learn from this one is that the beginning process is always going to be very difficult, and we shouldn't give up. And we should pray to the Lord to help us. So Kurma Avatar was there during the Samudra Manthan, and now here the Brahmanas were having the Supreme Lord within their minds. Also, in the case of Devaki, when Krishna was going to appear, the 6 sons had to be killed because they were representing the 6 anarthas: Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mada, Matsara. And so after they were removed, then Balramji, he came to clean that area, and then Krishna could come. So it says that once our impurities are removed, then by the grace of Guru, we can, have success on the path of bhakti. So that's why for good things to happen, sometimes impurities need to be taken out. And so looking at this lineage, Vena and Bahuka, they're actually like outliers or calamities from their side. An example of calamities or an analogy is given of the speed breakers. The role of speed breakers is to control the speed of the car and also to awaken the driver. Now imagine going on the motorway for 110 kilometers per hour. And the driver is going to think to himself, it's just a straight road, not many turns, and all the cars are going to be in their lane. It will reduce somehow the alertness of that driver. So these small, even on the motorway, we have those thin speed breakers. So they're there to alert the driver, to waken them up. So in that way, it's said that when many good things happen in our life and these calamities come, they're trying to tell us we need to get out of this material world. We're not here to stay permanently. Why would we want to stay in the world of miseries or everything that's temporary? So Anga and his ancestors, they were all very pure. And the question arises, how do Vena and Bahuka, how do they come into being? The question is similar to that of how do bad things happen to good people. So we've heard many reasons in the past from the verses, and also there could be multiple other possibilities out there. There's a point actually that Bhishma Dev makes when he is instructing Yudhishthir Maharaj on his deathbed. So a point that is relevant to Vena, Bahuka, and also within our life. So he's saying to the Pandavas that you've gone through great sufferings and injustices. Aho kashtam aho anyayam. How is it so that you've gone through so much sufferings? Your parents, Kunti Maharani, and also Pandu Maharaj, they were pious people. You yourselves as the Pandavas are very righteous people. And you are called Dharmanandans. Then he goes, one great quality of you guys is that during your sufferings, you took shelter of 3 things, which is Vipra, Dharma, and Achyutashaya. So Vipra meaning the Vaishnavas of the Lord. Dharma is religious principles. So our Dharma is Savai Pumsam Paro Dharmo Yato Bhaktira Dokshijay Ahetoki Apratyata Yayatma Suprasidati. So to engage ourselves in bhakti in an unmotivated and an uninterrupted way. And the last one is that they took shelter of Krishna, Achyuta. So if we take shelter of all these three things, then we won't be affected so much so of the calamities that come in our life. And that's why we shouldn't leave the association of Vaishnavas. Because what do Vaishnavas do? They guide us through Dharma or the scriptures to have Krishna Bhakti or Krishna Prem. And so Bhishma Dev, he moves on to saying that these sufferings are actually beyond the factor of karma. It may be due to the inevitable time, by whose force that even Brahmaji has to keep going ahead. But a devotee, as devotees, we shouldn't be disturbed by time, because time refers to the will of the Supreme Lord. Krishna says, Kalosmi Bharatashaba, time I am. And so we see that time is powerful and we need to respect it, regardless of if it gives us good things or bad things, because time ultimately is Krishna. So how do we understand the plan of the Lord? Bhishma Dev says, no one in this whole world can understand the plan of the Lord. It is inconceivable to anyone, and nor can we actually counteract the plan of the Lord. So simply we must cooperate with the plan of the Lord. And in this case of Vena, his father, Anga Maharaj, even though when Vena was little, he tried to obviously change the behavior of Vena, but he realized in the end that he couldn't do much. So he left the kingdom. And so Vena's birth and now Bahuka's may have also been due to the will of the Lord or providence. So Sarvakarana Karanam, Krishna is the cause of all causes. And so when does Krishna descend? Krishna says, Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyudhanam adharmasya tadatmanam sajamiham. So he descends whenever and wherever there is a decline in religious practices. So for Prithu Maharaj to actually descend, who is an empowered incarnation of Krishna, all these events may have had to take place. And this brings us to the topic of cloning, which verse 44 talks about. So there was, in the few classes I was listening to, one of them referenced Satput Prabhu. So he's a scientist, and on his YouTube channel there's actually cool videos of science and Krishna conscious related. So essentially for cloning, we need a living cell from the body. What the cell has is, obviously within the nucleus, it has DNA, which has the genetic or hereditary information. So what he says is, when we take an egg cell, for example, we take the nucleus out of it, and inside of it, so now it's a shell, and then inside of it we put the nucleus from the body that we're trying to clone. And that way the egg cell actually thinks that it has been fertilized, so it starts to split up and turns into an embryo. So that's how cloning essentially works. But of course, this experiment has to be repeated hundreds of times for there to be success. And scientifically, the success rate is only 1 to 5%, which is very, very less. And the scientists are still working on this technology. So even though in theory, the clone and the original being, they're going to be the same, genetically, but it's said that the environmental factors can also affect the growth or the nature of that person or being, the second thing. And so the scientists, when they try to clone animals these days, they find out, if they have success, they find out that it has a lot of defects as well. So the cloning that modern science has is very different to the cloning that the Brahmanas had done. And in modern science, we know that if the scientists can prove that a gene has any defects within it, by molecular technology, they can actually remove that part, and with the residue, they can make the other clone. But in this case, what the Brahmanas are doing, they're using the bad part of it, and they've produced Bahuka. And with the good genes, later we'll know that they will obviously invoke the Lord as Prithu Maharaj and Archie. And we see from yesterday's verse the importance of samskaras. So the underlying principle of samskaras is that we need to give benefit or sukriti to the soul, so that soul can then go to the next level in his bhakti path. Skanda Purana says, Janmana Jayate Shudra. So whenever we're born, we're not born as Shukdev Goswami or Prahlad Maharaj. They're very rare personalities, elevated souls. So whenever many people here, we're born as Shudras. However, when we come into Krishna consciousness, by the mercy of Krishna and associating with Vaishnavas, we can, obviously many of our gunas and karmas, they change. Anartha, nivritti, it begins. And so that's the power of sadhu sangha and the holy name. It gradually purifies us. And so Srila Prabhupada says that if we don't follow these samskaras strictly, then the descendants of the family lineage, they will start to degrade, and sins will start accumulating within that family. And in Bhagavad Gita, it mentions Jayate Varna Shankara, so unwanted progeny will start to arise. And so what will these unwanted children do? They will cause hellish life for both the family and also for those who destroy that tradition. So in that sense, Bahuka, he inherited that from his father, Vena. And it also flowed onto his people. They went from being like Kshatriya kings all the way to the lower species. So these unwanted children that we see in like our society now, they grew up feeling very neglected. They said that no one's cared for them, so now we're not going to care for anybody. And when they grow up, they have a very strongly negative attitude towards the society, and they act in such revengeful ways. And now we'll go through 2 examples of Vaishnavas who were also within royalty, and they're actually opposite to that of Vena and Bahuka by character and by birth. So we'll see how pure Vaishnavas of the Lord conduct their lives. So first one is of our great Acharya, Narottam Das Thakur. So in Krishna Leela, he was Champak Manjari. And so Champak Manjari, having mercy upon the fallen conditioned souls, she descended as Narottama in the village of Keturi, which was a district of Bengal. nowadays, or modern day, Bangladesh. And so he was born to King Krishnananda Datta and Nayani Devi. He was a prince who was actually the sole heir to the power, to the wealth of that kingdom. And so he actually started preaching when he was a child. So as a baby, the first samskar actually is of the anna prashan to that child. When his father and mother were giving that grain of rice to him, he wasn't accepting it because he knew it hadn't been offered to the Supreme Lord. So his parents offered it to Krishna and gave it to him. And that's when he accepted it. So even as a child, he was showing the importance of Krishna Prasadam. Later, also an astrologer that was there, he said, obviously seeing the auspicious signs on the baby, he said that this child will be the best amongst men. And that's why he was called as Narottam. So Nara meaning man and Uttam meaning the greatest, so best amongst men. And during his schooling, he was known as Shrutidhara. So someone who's a Shrutidhara is, they can, when they hear anything once, then that person can just memorize it instantly. And so he learned the language of Sanskrit, and that way he learned all of the Vedas there. And that's how he developed his love for Krishna and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So his parents, seeing his desire to leave everything and go away from the kingdom and not relate with the family or do his royal duties, they actually assigned guards to protect him and keep him within the palace. They were afraid he was going to go and there was no other heir to their kingdom. And so he was locked up basically within his palace. But fortunately, he had the association of one of the great devotees of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu by the name of Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, from whom he heard the pastimes of Sri Krishna and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And that way, he again started to develop more and more love towards Krishna, and he desired to associate with the Vaishnavas. And this was actually becoming an obsession in his life that he actually, one day, what happened was he started crying. He cried so much so that the Supreme Lord, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, actually appeared within his dreams and said, instructed him to go to Vrindavan. And the second thing he said, that accept Lokanath Goswami as your spiritual master. And so that's what he did. Even though he was a child, at night, that same night, he left, or he snuck out of his palace and went through the forest route to go through to Vrindavan. And so what happened was next morning, the king and the queen, they couldn't see their son within, obviously, his chamber rooms, so they sent detectives to go after him. And mind you, the distance from Keturi all the way to Vrindavan is 1,000 kilometers. So days and days, the detectives, they found Narottam Das Thakur. They were forcibly trying to take him back to the palace. But Narottam Das Thakur, because his love was so pure, he's genuine with his desire to serve Krishna and his Guru, he, with his sweet words, was saying to the detectives that please don't take me. My heart, I've given it to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now I desire for nothing else but to serve the Supreme Lord and his Vaishnavas. And so in this way, hearing the sweet words, the detectives actually let him go. Not only did they let him go, they gave him some money to help along with his journey. And so Narottam Das Thakur, when he reached Vrindavan, at Radha Govinda temple, he met his Shiksha Guru Jiva Goswami. And so Jiva Goswami actually took him to a place where there were other great acharyas assembled there. And he saw, or Narottam Das Thakur, he saw his spiritual master, Lokanath Goswami. And he immediately, he fell at his lotus feet and begged him, please make me your disciple. Lokanath Goswami, he was saying, in my entire life, I've never made a disciple. How can I make you one? And I have no love for Godhead. What am I supposed to give to you? I am very old at this age that I have no capacity to even look after you or train you up. And my own spiritual masters, Rupa Goswami and Sanatan Goswami, they have left this world. And all in all, the Supreme Personality of Godhead has come into your dreams. So what else am I supposed to give to you? In this way, Narottam Das Thakur, he cried and said that I have actually, in this material world where there's a lot of illusion and miseries, I've come to seek shelter of you because without the Guru, I'm going to be lost. But again, to obviously respect the sentiment of his Guru, he didn't say much. And he knew that Lokanath Goswami didn't want anyone to do service to him. Because Lokanath Goswami, out of humility, he was saying that I'm not that qualified for anyone to do service to me. And so in the olden days, what used to happen in Vrindavan as well, is that people used to wake up before sunrise. They used to do their morning business and also take shower and start on with their morning duties. So Lokanath Goswami, he was seeing for the few days that that area was actually very clean and very fragrant. So he was thinking, how is it possible that this area is like that? And so the next day he woke up, especially early, and went to that same area and hid behind the bushes. And so what did he see there? He saw Narottam Das Thakur, a great scholar and a prince. He had tears flowing of affection within his eyes. Coming there, he was cleaning his Guru Maharaj's stool and urine with his bare hands. And he was still crying. He was cleaning as if he was cleaning the altar of the Supreme Lord, making it clean for his Maharaj. And so, Lokanath Goswami Maharaj, seeing this, his heart, it melted. He came out of the bushes and said, "Oh Narottam, what are you doing? You're a prince. Why are you touching my stool and urine?" He was very confused. And then Narottam Das Thakur, he obviously paid his obeisances to his Gurudev and said, "My dear Gurudev, I have left the illusory material world. I've left everything. And now I've come here and achieved the ultimate perfection of my desires." And what was his desire? His desire was to serve a great soul in the menial way possible. He was serving his spiritual master. And so seeing his austerity and his sincerity as well, Lokanath Goswami, he made him his disciple, his one and only disciple within his lifetime. And so in this way, Narottam Das Thakur, he spent his life relishing the holy name of the Lord. He even wrote multiple bhajans that we know. And so, on the order of his spiritual master, he went back to Keturi. He was given 2 instructions to follow. First one, to preach the glories of the holy name in the spirit of compassion. And second was to worship the form of the Lord in a deity. And so, Narottam Das Thakur, we know he's attracted millions of people on the path of bhakti, simply by his humble example and purity of his heart. So, writing bhajans, which we even sang today for Shri Guru, so Guru Puja. So Shri Guru Charana Padma Kevala Bhakati Sadman. This bhajan was actually his expression of love, his humility towards his spiritual master. He also sings, well, one of the other bhajans that he sings that Srila Prabhupada actually likes is Hari Hari Bifale Janama Gunaino Manushya Janama Paya Radha Krishna Na Bhajiya. So it shows the humility of his heart, because he's saying that I've taken birth into this material world. I've obtained this rare form of life, which is the human form. It's rare because I can attain the love of Godhead, but I've wasted so many years in not serving the Supreme Lord. So in this way, devotees and personal associates of the Supreme Lord, they come down from the spiritual sky to show us how we should conduct our lives. Okay, so that was our first pastime, and we'll go to our second pastime. And so this one is an example of a king who is well known within the 4 Vaishnava sampradayas that we have. And he is known as King Kulashekar Alvar. He's a great saint, and he ruled in the spirit of Ram Rajya. And so he came from the Shira dynasty. So they were actually coming from the line of the Kaustubha jewel that Krishna wears. And so in the Shira dynasty, they took Anant Padmanabh as their king. So Sarvaloka Maheshwaram, Krishna as the Supreme Lord, and that they were merely the trustees. And so the tradition for their dynasty was that the king each day, every day, twice a day, used to come with his family, his ministers, and pay obeisances to the Lord and read out a report of what was actually happening within the kingdom. And so they used to call themselves as Padmanabh Das, the servants of Anant Padmanabh. And they knew that we will be kings for a certain amount of years, then we'll die. And there will be another king, and he will also die. The king that will remain there constantly, forever, is Krishna. And so that's how they called Krishna as the king, and they were the trustees. And in that way, the kingdom was always very united. So what happened was, King Dhritavratad, he had no child, so he worshipped Lord Narayan, Lord Vishnu, to send him a child who would be the next ruler for his kingdom, and that he will lead everyone to the path of bhakti. And so that's when Alvar Kulashekar was born. He was a gifted child because he was sent by Krishna himself. And so he had the knowledge of everything on how to rule the kingdom. He was a great warrior. He was expert in warfare. He had political knowledge, and he was very learned in the Shastras. He was fair in his rulings to his citizens. So for the poor, they felt protected always. For the rich, they felt empowered. And for the arrogant or the ignorant in the society, they couldn't exercise their tendencies because he was also strict towards them. And so in this way, King Kulashekar, he ruled over 3 major dynasties in South India. So the Chola dynasty in Kanchipuram, Pandya dynasty in Madurai, and Shira dynasty in Travancore. So it's said historically that these dynasties, they had different kings and they were fighting against each other. But knowing the might, knowing the wisdom of King Kulashekar, they actually wanted him to be their king. And so, in this way, King Kulashekar had everything. It's like a perfect example of someone who is successful materially, right? But growing up, King Kulashekar, he thought, even though I have everything, I have nothing. He actually began to think that one day this body will die. The soul is the actual life of it, right? He said without the soul, the body is just a corpse. And that the soul is taking shelter within this body merely to do something, and then it will go to the next body later on. And in meditating in this way, with the grace of Krishna and the beauty of bhakti actually started sprouting within his heart. He became very spiritual. At that one point that he was thinking that without the association of Vaishnavas, it was like living in the gallows with a rope actually tied around his neck. And so, like Vibhishan from Ramayana, because he was ruling in the spirit of Ramraja, he was saying that I will sacrifice everything to serve my Lord, Sri Ram. And he was actually saying that he will go to Sri Rangam to take shelter of Sri Ranganath. He will go to Tirupati to worship Balaji, and he will also go to Kanchipuram to worship Lord Varadraj. He just had that simple desire to serve the Lord and his devotees. He started actually to invite Saints and Vaishnavas to his palace, and this intensified his love, and he actually wanted to leave the kingdom. He wanted to resign his role or job as a king. And so his ministers, they didn't know what to do, because they're like, this king is very great. Without such a king who people have a lot of faith in, we are nothing. So they came up with a plan. They said that if the king goes to Sri Rangam and he associates with those devotees, he will never come back. There was no chance of him coming back. So they started inviting Vaishnavas or saints over to the palace. So whenever the king said, next morning I will be going to Sri Rangam, as soon as he was about to leave the doors, he used to see a Vaishnava. So then he used to call the Vaishnava inside, give them prasadam, they used to do Harikatha, Harikirtan, and in this way, days turned into weeks, turned into months and years. It went on. And that way he was always absorbed in serving the devotees of the Lord. And so this way he had access, or he also knew the Vedas, the Puranas, Itihasas, Ramayana. And so with Ramayana, coming to that point, he made it a regulation that each day of his life he would read some section of Ramayana. And he didn't just read for the sake of reading. He actually truly lived Ramayana, which in the past tense that we go through now. So once, while they were reading Valmiki Ramayana, they came to the part where Shupnaka's nose, it was being cut off. And so Shupnaka had gone back to Lanka to complain to Ravan and the 2 brothers. What happened after is Kara and Dushana, they were going to Panchavati with 14,000 Rakshasa soldiers. And so Sri Ram, seeing all these soldiers coming towards them at Panchavati, he told Lakshman to take Mother Sita a little bit far away and protect her. And that he himself was going to fight all those soldiers by himself. And so Valmiki Ramayana, he actually writes, how is it that Ram is going to kill off all these soldiers single-handedly? As soon as King Kulashekar, he heard that one line, he got up from his asana and he said, immediately assemble my army. We are going to go to Panchavati and we're going to help Ram. How is it that we call ourselves of devotees and we're going to leave Sri Ram there to fight all of them alone? How is that possible? And so he got up and got on his chariot and left. And because the army was also ordered to follow him, to help him fight the war, they also went. His ministers, they were actually very confused because they were thinking that their king had gone mad in devotion because Ramayana happened millions of years ago. So they made a plan. they told some of the army from the backside to go around the king and come from in front of him. That's what the army did. Some of them, they went around and came from in front. And they said, "Dear king, we've just come from Panchvati, and we've heard and we've seen that Sri Ram has conquered single-handedly the 14,000 soldiers alone, and he has been reunited with Mother Sita." And the king, being very pleased to hear this, he was overjoyed, and he said, "Jai Sri Ram." And so when they went back to their kingdom, they had a great celebration. And so in this way, whenever good things happened in Ramayana itself, the king used to celebrate such events. And so that's why from this incident, they took a note that while reading Ramayana, the good parts, they will expand on it. Whereas if there are bad parts, they will not go in so much depth for that one. And so what happened was, one day, the reading guru, he had to go someplace else for a different job. So he sent his son to do the reading for that day. But he forgot one important thing. The important thing that the king had such divine sentiments and not to go through any specific pastimes like that. And so this son was actually reading in so much detail about the part where Mother Sita was being kidnapped by Ravan and she was being tortured in Lanka. And so when the king, he actually heard this, agony started within his heart, and he jumped up again from his asana and he said, "We are all going to cross this ocean and go to Sri Lanka. I will burn Lanka down and I will slay that demon Ravan. I will protect Mother Sita and take her and give her back to Ram." So in this way, they again left to go to Sri Lanka. As they came to the ocean, he jumped out of his chariot and he started running straight in through to the ocean. And it was to the point of life and death because he was being basically submerged into the ocean itself. And from in front of him, what did he see coming? He saw his beloved Lord Sri Ram come. And with him was Sita Devi. Sri Ram said, "Dear king, with your mercy only I could slay that king Ravan. And now Vibhishan has taken over and he is taking rule over Sri Lanka. And Mother Sita, he didn't say Mother Sita, sorry. Sita has now been saved and she is with me." And so the king, again being overjoyed, he said, "All glories to you, my lord. Now let's go back to Ayodhya, not his kingdom. Let's go back to Ayodhya and celebrate there." Sri Ram understood his sentiments, that he was still thinking that this is real life, that Ramayana was actually happening right now. Then Sri Ram said, "I will carry you from this ocean and take you to the shore. Just as how I carry my devotees from this ocean of birth and death and take them to my shore in Vaikuntha." And so Sri Ram actually personally lifted King Kulashekar and took him to the shore and to his kingdom, and he left. So, of course, they had a celebration that day that Sri Ram had conquered Ravana. And so my Guru Maharaj, His Holiness Radhanath Maharaj, so he says that for Vaishnavas, the ecstasy of this kind of love, it actually swells our heart with appreciation. We should not and cannot actually imitate such great souls because we simply want to cherish the dust of their feet, but by being the servant of their servants. And so what happened was, after this incident, these ministers were thinking, what are we going to do? It's creating such instabilities. Whenever the king is in meetings, he sees a Vaishnava, because the king actually allowed all these Vaishnavas to roam freely within the palace. Whenever he saw the Vaishnavas coming along, he would leave that meeting and go there to serve the Vaishnavas. So they were saying the Vaishnavas are actually distracting the king from his duties. So they were coming up with a plan. They said the root cause of the king wanting to leave the kingdom and go to Sri Rangam is that he has faith in the devotees. So they knew Ram Navami was going to come up. So they made a plot. What they said was the deity of Sri Ram, he had a necklace that was full of gems. So we'll hide that and we'll blame it on these Vaishnavas that they had stolen it. And when the king realizes that these Vaishnavas have stolen it, he'll lose faith in them. And then by losing faith in them, he will not want to go to Sri Ranganath. And so the next day, that's exactly what happened. The king came to know that the special necklace of Sri Ram had been stolen. And then he heard what these ministers did. They were pointing at the Vaishnavas. They said, look, king, that these Vaishnavas were the ones who actually stole the necklace out of their greed. They stole the necklace of your beloved Lord. The king, he heard this very quietly from his side, but then he got up and he said, ministers, now listen to me. It is impossible for these Vaishnavas to steal from the Lord. They have love for the Lord. They can't even think of stealing from the Lord. And so, to prove to you my conviction and to disapprove of you, your illusion, bring to me a basket with a poisonous cobra within it, and I will put my hand within that basket. If these Vaishnavas are pure and spotless at their heart and their intentions, I will not get harmed. But if whatever you are saying is true, then I will be harmed. So these ministers, they did. They bought that basket with a cobra within it. The king, without thinking, he put his hand into the basket and took it out. And of course, it was unharmed. And so these ministers, they were actually startled, seeing the faith that the king had within the Vaishnavas. They went to the king and bowed down to him. They begged his forgiveness, saying, dear king, it was us. We had hidden that necklace of Sri Ram. We thought that these Vaishnavas were actually distracting you from your duties, and that's why we had done this. And King Kulashekar, being obviously a follower of Sri Ram, he forgave them. Just as Sri Ram, he says that for anyone who takes shelter of him even once, sincerely, he will protect him forever. And so, in saying this, wait 1 second, sorry. So he forgave his ministers, and this incident only intensified him to leave his kingdom and go to Sri Rangam. And he said it was now time for him to actually leave the palace and go there. So Bhagavatam actually says a person who doesn't leave the place where the Supreme Lord or his devotees are being blasphemed, then his Sukriti, he becomes bereft of his Sukriti and has a downfall. So he actually coronated his son Dritavrata to the throne and started to leave to go to Sri Rangam and actually made his base there. He spent his time serving the Lord and the Vaishnavas. And after reading all these scriptures and taking their sense out of it, he wrote a famous book called Mukunda Mala Stotra. And that was the garland of essential truth of Lord Mukunda, which is a spiritual classic which is celebrated even hundreds of years later now. So there's a verse from Mukunda Mala that he prays to the Lord saying, Krishna rakshatu no jagatraya guru Krishnam namadvam sadha Krishnena khila shatravo vinihata Krishnaya tasmai namaha Krishna deva samutitam jagadidam Krishnasya dasosmiham Krishne tishtati vishwametadakhilam He Krishna raksha swamam. His translation, he says, may Krishna, the spiritual master of the three worlds, protect us. Continually bow down to Krishna. Krishna has killed all of our enemies. Obeisances to Krishna. From Krishna alone, this world has come into being. I am the servant of Krishna, and this entire world rests within Krishna. Oh Krishna, please protect me. And so that's when he departed from this world and went to Vaikuntha. One thing we can learn from this is that lineage, from that one, people from good lineages, we should respect them. But if we ourselves come from good lineages or great families, we shouldn't be proud or take it for granted. We should actually take it as a great responsibility to act in such ways. And so Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, during his South Indian yatras, he visited all such places and opened up the treasures to such incredible histories and wisdoms of these places. And so we will conclude here. If we have any questions, comments, or corrections, please feel free. Yes. Hare Krishna. Thank you. Lineage. Okay, just going to clarify that one. So is it that Krishna protects the lineages, and how is it that we have great devotees right now? Mhm. Yeah, so actually, hearing from the lectures that I've heard and from the previous verse, it comes down to what I'm actually thinking is the point of samskaras. So, when a person is actually born right from the family, samskara is actually coming through to him. The consciousness of the parents goes through to that child, and that's how the child, from birth or from the time of conception and through to birth and everything, he's cultured in such a way that he acts like in a good quality. So, being twice born, so the first being from the parents and the second being from the guru and shastra, that also changes the nature of the person. So that's all I can think of at the moment, Prabhu. Anything else if you wanted to add? Yeah. Yeah. Couldn't bring it. Again, from the lectures that I've listened to, they said that the soul actually, they didn't invoke for a soul to come within it. It was merely by just the Lord, as in like the Lord himself. Basically, anyone who comes into families, we cannot determine which soul actually comes there. So they just, I guess, through the yagyas or the churning, it appeared there. And also saying why the body, like you also mentioned about the importance not being on the soul. So they required the body at that time because the genetic composition of that great lineage was within that one. Also in a lecture I heard, how is it that, oh actually 1 second. No, that's fine. But yeah, that's all I can come up with at the moment. So invoking the soul, they actually didn't do that from their side. But yeah, I'm sorry. Anything else you wanted to add to this question? Sorry. Okay, then, Hare Krishna. Grantarashram Bhagavad Mahapuran ki jai, jai Shri Radha Gopinath ji ki jai, Shri Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Jai, that's it. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki jai.